Hello, dear listener. After listening, write a review about the story. Thank you. The village of Ridgeville has always been off the beaten path. It was a quiet community, populated mostly by farmers and ordinary people who followed the traditions of their ancestors. In the late afternoon, under the warm orange glow of the sun, the village resembled a picturesque landscape created by a master. The rays glided over the spire of the old chapel of St. John, and birds sang in the treetops. Men were working in the fields, women were hanging up the laundry, and a blacksmith was finishing the last blow with his hammer, closing his workshop for the night. The streets were full of children's laughter, as if the village itself was singing a song of serenity. Ridgeville lived its own life. Residents did not care about the news from neighboring towns or even the nearest neighborhood. They were just doing their jobs. And although everyday life was simple, in the evenings people disappeared into their homes. As darkness fell, the village changed. Every resident knew that Ridgeville, nestled in the remote hills of Virginia, was hiding a dark secret. It was not discussed aloud, but everyone knew it was real. Where other people believed that evil came from criminals or natural disasters, the people of Ridgeville knew that the real danger lay deeper. Most of the graves in the local cemetery were a direct result of this danger. Disease or time were powerless against what had taken so many lives. Some of these graves were empty. What haunted the village did not just kill, it left no victims. People did not even find the bodies of their loved ones. However, it was clear that evil had taken them. One day, late in the evening, several children were playing near the cemetery. They were twirling an old toy in their hands, making rude jokes and throwing it up. It was the favorite doll of a little girl named Grace. She begged for it back, but the children just laughed. The toy flew too high and got caught on a branch of an old oak tree that stood next to the cemetery. Grace tried to reach the doll, but she was unsuccessful. Her older brother Jason mockingly suggested that she learn to jump higher. One of the older girls gave Jason a stern look. She stopped the game with her firm voice and said it was time to go home because it was getting dark. The wind that had suddenly picked up died down as suddenly as it had started. Along with it, the children's laughter stopped. The children stood frozen like statues as the sun sank behind the spire of the chapel, casting a long shadow over the field. Their bodies were chilled, and the silence that followed seemed almost tangible. Grace asked for her doll back, hopeful in her voice. Jason turned away from his sister, saying that it was too late and he wasn't going to go out there when the sun was setting. He nervously made excuses, but the older girl sharply took his arm. Her eyes were full of anger. She reminded him that it was he who had thrown the toy, and now he had to fix it before it got too dark. Jason slowly walked across the cemetery, muttering under his breath. His movements were tentative, each step difficult, as if his legs were getting heavier. His thoughts were filled with terrifying images. He imagined the ground beginning to move under his feet, and those who rested in their graves rising to keep him there forever. His voice whispered softly to himself, "Do not step on the graves. If you do, they will pull you in." He tried to remember if this was a real threat or just a horror story he had been told as a child. Fear gripped him so tightly that even his own breathing seemed too loud in this absolute silence. His eyes quickly scanned the sloping tombstones that surrounded him on all sides. Each one bore the names of someone he might have known, people too young to have taken their lives because they had broken the one rule that no one dared to ignore. Jason realized how close he was to making the same mistake. The sun finally disappeared over the horizon, leaving the cemetery at the mercy of the shadows that fluttered in the wind as if they were alive. Jason glanced at one of the leaning headstones, and an icy wave of fear shook his body. It seemed to him that his own name was carved into the stone next to the date. In shock, he closed his eyes and tried to convince himself that it was just a game of imagination. As he repeated in his mind that it was unreal, he felt his legs trembling and his heart almost leaping out of his chest. When he opened his eyes again, the name on the headstone had changed, and now the stone bore an inscription that the person had been buried there 2 years ago. Jason breathed a sigh of relief and whispered to himself that he was almost there. A few more steps, and the doll that had caused his fear would be in his hands. Gathering the last drop of courage, he stepped forward and gingerly reached for the toy hanging from the branch. He tried to persuade his trembling body to move faster. Just pick it up and run, he convinced himself. His fingers touched the doll's plastic arm, but at the same moment something incredible happened. Jason felt the doll twitch. Shock and horror froze him for a moment, but his instincts quickly took over. He rushed back like the wind, stumbling and praying that what he had just experienced would not follow him. Out of breath, he reached his friends and, barely able to breathe, explained what had happened. The older girl looked at him with contempt, as if he was exaggerating. She tried to make him go back for the toy, but Jason shook his head fiercely. He firmly declared that this was not going to happen, at least not today. He promised Grace that he would come back the next day and find her doll. If it was missing, he would buy her a new one, or even make one himself. But right now, he was sure they had to leave before their appearance here turned into something much worse. The children realized that it was useless to argue. Jason was scared to the core, and everyone felt the cold wind pushing them to run away from this place. The older girl looked at Hannah. "Listen, I hate to agree with him, but he's right, we've been out too long." After these words, all the children instantly disappeared, dashing home. And only Hania was left to stare at the dark cemetery road. Her little doll Sophia was lying so close, but so far away. She looked at the doll, while the leaves swirled around her felt body. For a moment, she thought she saw the doll sit up and wave to her. That was all she needed to get scared and run home. All over the village, people were driven to madness. The wind became even stronger and more frightening. Father Gregory locked the church and stared into the forest at the foot of the mountain. They would come tonight, he was sure of it. The villagers had been cautious lately. The streets empty, doors locked, and crucifixes placed in almost every window. They did not sleep, and only the fallen leaves whistled softly. The last rays of the sun were hiding behind the horizon, and the sky was covered with a black blanket. The life of Seredniansk village, which is usually full of love and laughter, was stopped, because in the hours of darkness, this place did not belong to its inhabitants. It belonged to them. "But Mom, I can't sleep without Sophia." Hania begged her mother when she was put to bed. Her mother sat on the bed and stroked her daughter's hair. "I know I'm sorry, baby, but you're becoming a big girl now, and I know you're stronger than that. You just need to turn over and close your eyes. The morning sun will not have time to look through this window, and everything will be fine again." The mother calmed the girl down. "What about Sophia? She's all alone there, alone, and with them," Hania said, and a shiver ran through her body at the mere mention of them. Her mother laughed and continued to stroke her hair. "Don't worry about the doll. They won't be interested in it. In the morning light we will go and get her, and she will still have a big smile on her face. Then you can hit your brother over the head with it." "Where is there no evil?" asked Hania. Her mother looked down and shook her head. I know it's hard to understand, but evil is everywhere we go. If we let evil scare us, we let it win, and there will be more of it. Rachel lay in a dark room, filled only with the cold, distant glow of the moon coming through the window. In the village of Knightsville, no one left their lanterns lit after dark, and not even candles flickered in the houses. The moon was the only witness to what happened at night. The girl tossed and turned in bed, trying to fall asleep, but her thoughts kept returning to the Sophie doll she had left at the cemetery. Her mother had told her to hold on to the light and not let the darkness take over. These words tried to calm her fear, but anxiety still filled her mind. Rachel had almost fallen asleep when she heard a scratching sound outside her window, and a cold fear gripped her body. The sound was so clear that it seemed as if it was coming from right next door. She tried to convince herself that it was just a tree branch that had been caught in the wind. But the sound repeated itself. It became louder. The girl's heart was pounding as she whispered to herself, "You can't come in here. If they ask you, I will say no. You are not welcome here. So please leave." But the scratching did not stop. Suddenly, a thin, gentle voice sounded that made her heart sink. The voice was familiar. It belonged to her, but not quite. "Rachel, I'm so cold. Let me in." Rachel opened her eyes wide, her body frozen with fear. She knew that voice. It was Sophie's voice, the voice of the doll she used to voice when she played with it. At that moment, the girl felt something was wrong, but her curiosity got the better of her. She turned her head to the window. Sophie was standing on a ledge behind the glass. Her tiny plastic hands were scratching the window frame, her eyes shining with something new, awareness and anger. "Why did you leave me there? I was alone, and I was very scared." The doll's voice sounded pitiful, and her face, which had always made the girl happy, now only caused anxiety. Rachel tried to find the strength to respond. "I'm so sorry. It's not my fault. Jason did it." Sophie laughed, and it was so unnatural that Rachel's skin crawled with goosebumps. The smile on the doll's face grew wider than seemed possible, and her voice rang out again. "I'm cold, Rachel. Please let me in." Rachel froze, knowing that these words were taboo. Everyone in the village knew that inviting someone or something in at night was the worst mistake anyone could make. She swallowed the lump of fear in her throat and answered, trembling, "You know I can't, Sophie." Rachel stood by the window, wringing her hands hesitantly. She knew the rules just as well as everyone else in Knightsville. No one should open doors or windows after dark, even if it seems safe. But Sophie's voice, gentle and persuasive, sounded so real. The smile on the doll's face grew wider, almost unnatural. "Don't worry, you don't have to let me in. Just open the window and pull me in. Then we will always be together. You'll never be lonely again." The girl shook her head, trying to remember her mother's words, but the fog in her mind blurred everything but that voice. Rachel took a step forward, then another. "Just open the window, and we can play all night." The voice sounded gentle, but it had something about it that made the girl feel coldly afraid. Rachel lifted the latch and opened the window. The cool night breeze touched her face, bringing a brief moment of relief from the stifling air of the room. She reached out to pick up the doll that seemed so safe and familiar. As her fingers touched Sophie's felted body, another hand grabbed her. It was not the doll's hand. Cold, wet, and hard, it had long, sharp claws that dug into her skin. The power behind this hand was immense, and in an instant Rachel found herself pulled out of the window. She screamed, shrill and loud, but the scream was lost in the emptiness of the night. A creature appeared in front of her, so terrifying that all the horror stories she had ever heard seemed like children's fairy tales. It was a woman, or perhaps it had been a woman. Her long black hair curled in the air like a living curtain. The skin that remained on her body was dark gray, peeling off in many places, revealing not only her bones, but also the vile creatures that crawled beneath. Maggots, spiders, millipedes, all these creatures lived inside the body of this monster, adding to the horror of her image. Its mouth, stretching into a wide, eerie smile, said something silent. But even without words, Rachel realized that it was an invitation into darkness from which there was no return. The woman's fingers were long but crooked, as if they had been smashed with a hammer over and over again. Her mouth was open, and two large incisors were protruding from her blackened gums. But it was the eyes of this monster that scared Hannah the most. They were not burning red, as she had been told, but black as pitch bullets that had crashed into her soul. The nightmarish woman wrapped her ugly arms around Hannah and rushed into the night. Mikado woke up to Hania's screams. Nikita woke up to Hania's scream. He instantly realized that it was not a scream in a nightmare. It was very real. The boy got out of bed and ran as soon as his feet touched the ground. He ran through the house, knocking over things on his way, but he didn't care. He had to get to his sister. Nothing else mattered. He burst into her room, and his eyes never left the open window. Hania was small, but not stupid. She would never have opened the window for them. Why, Ganuja, why? His thoughts were interrupted by a terrible rumbling outside. His eyes narrowed, and he saw his sister being carried away by a vile creature. Immediately, everything else lost its meaning. Not the village rules, not his own safety. Only his sister mattered now. Mikita jumped out of the window and fell to the ground. The fall from the second floor shattered his left leg. The pain throbbed throughout his body. He knew his leg was broken, but it didn't matter. He staggered through the streets, chasing after Hani's screams. "Help me," he cried out in agony. "Please, for God's sake, someone help them." But he knew it was all in vain. The people of this village did not leave their homes at night. He was alone in the fight for Hani's life. So let it be. Mikita ran as fast as he could on his broken leg. Even if both his legs were cut off, he would have crawled to her. He ran out into the woods, and to his surprise saw Hannah there. She was standing near an old oak tree, shaking from head to toe. "Thank God. Come to me. Let's run home." Hania did not move, but stood there breathing heavily. "Come on, sister. You're not in danger now that I'm here. Please come to me," the boy begged. And then he saw it. A dark gray hand was barely distinguishable in the light of the moon on her shoulder. Then, through the darkness, he saw several pairs of pitch-black eyes. They were eyes that shouldn't have stood out in the dark, but nothing in nature was as black as those eyes looking at him. Nikita took a deep breath. "Please let her go. I offer my life for her. I am much more full of blood than she is," the boy begged. At the word blood, he heard a loud snort. Mikita got to his knees and lowered his head. "I offer you my life and ministry. Feed on me, torture me forever. Just let her go, please." With his head down, he could not see, but the sound of the creature's breathing was getting louder and louder. And then there was an unnatural silence, as if the universe was holding its breath. Then out of that silence came a cold and inhuman male voice. The voice sounded like something was pulling Hania into the forest. Hania's screams echoed in the night. Mikita screamed back and got to his feet to run after her, but a pair of strong hands grabbed the boy's chest and held him down. "No, boy, you must not go there." Nikita knew that voice very well. It was Father Gregor's voice. "I know how you feel. child. Believe me. But there is nothing more you can do. Nikita continued to struggle and kick, but it was useless. Finally, his sister's screams faded into the night. It was the night that changed Nikita's life forever. It was the night his sister was taken by a vampire. Thank you for listening to the story. I look forward to your comments and subscriptions.